Story time about how my best friend and I were dating the same guy. So a little background information, I was 15 and it was my freshman year of high school. And I had been dating this guy for 3 months who we're gonna call Jacob. He was a part of the popular group and was known for cheating on all his past girlfriends. But why would I see that as a red flag? Because I'm fucking dumb. Anyways, of course he was cheating on me too, and people would tell me that. At first I wanted to leave him, but the problem was he came from a super rich family and he was really cute. So in reality, I really only wanted to stay with him so that way he would keep spoiling me with expensive gifts. He would literally buy me anything and everything I wanted. So my best friend, who we can call Taylor, she came over for a sleepover. The whole night we talked about Jacob cheating on me and she asked me why I had not broken up with him yet. So I told her why I wouldn't leave and then she hyped me up. She was like, period sis, do what you gotta do. Well then I came up with this super good plan for my best friend and I both to get gifts from him and use him. So then I came out and I said, you should be his side chick. Like for part 2. Story time about how my best friend and I were dating the same guy at the same time. So like I said, she was sneaking around with him. Meanwhile, she was telling me everything. He was buying her gifts, he was buying me gifts, so everything was perfect. But we had one little trick left up our sleeves. We decided that we would both make a wish list and put everything that we wanted on there. And at the end of the month, we would have a sleepover, bring everything that we got. Well, on the night of the sleepover, we brought everything, and let me tell you, this filled up my king-size bed. There was stuff all on the floor. So what did I do? I took a video of it, and I uploaded it to Instagram, tagging him and his friends, and wrote a long-ass caption, basically saying, if you cross me, this is what will happen. You'll get played. He was so embarrassed, his friends and everyone at school basically laughed at his dumb ass. Well, he ended up telling his mommy about it, and they came and talked to my parents, and they pretty much just told them to get the fuck over it, like your son did what he did willingly. She didn't do anything wrong. She meaning me. My dad was kind of mad at me, but my mom was super impressed about it, and we laugh about it all the time. Part 2 about how my best friend and I were dating the same guy. So like I said before, he was cheating on me 24/7, but he was spending money on me 24/7. That's the reason why I wouldn't leave him. So then I told my best friend that she should be his side chick. So that way we could both use him for his money. So Taylor started flirting with him to try and make him want her too. And I may have given it a little push by giving her his Snapchat, so she tried to slide in his DMs and then also tried texting him on Snapchat. At first, his cheating ass did not want to do anything with her. And I was like, the one time. Anyways, he was like, I'm with your best friend right now. I don't think we should do this. But of course, like all boys who cheat, he ended up meeting up with her. And they started sneaking around. Meanwhile, I knew all the tea. Taylor was telling me everything. Taylor started getting things from him 24/7 and he looked so stupid. Well, then we decided to fuck with him one more time. Like for part 3.
Cinco de Mayo matters. No, it's not just tacos and margaritas. Here's the history of Cinco de Mayo. No, I'm not Mexican. I'm from Nicaragua, which I'm gonna do a whole series on Nicaragua. I refuse to take off these pimple patches. They're the only ones I have, okay? So don't judge me. Cinco de Mayo celebrates Mexico's victory over the French Empire in the Battle of Puebla. This all went down in 1862, a long time ago. Everything started when Mexico had a huge debt with the Spanish, the French, and the English. Mexico could not afford it, so they had to declare a temporary moratorium, which means we're not gonna pay you guys for like 2 years. And then the French, the Spanish, and the English were like, no, we're coming over there. They sent all their troops over to Mexico. Damn, gosh, that's really pigmented. So the French had an ulterior motive because they wanted to establish a French empire in Mexico. France was under the rule of Napoleon III, which, by the way, he was the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. And coincidentally, Napoleon Bonaparte died May 5th, 1821. And then his nephew went on to try to establish a French empire in Mexico. I mean, what is happening? This is when Spain and the English withdrew, so the French were left by themselves. But of course they stayed because they had that ulterior motive. So the French march over to Puebla, and they're fully expecting to win. But what the French didn't know was that the Mexicans had way more troops than they thought. I'll tell you the number by the end of this video. You're gonna be shook. For 3 days, the Mexicans managed to keep the French back. This meant that they were able to kill the French as they came towards them in the battle. The Mexicans ended up killing about 500 French soldiers, whereas only less than 100 Mexican soldiers died that day. This was such an important battle that they won because the French had not been defeated for over 50 years. That day, the French had 8,000 soldiers. Let's guess how many the Mexicans had. A little less than 4,000 men. So winning the battle was a huge deal. Then President Juarez declared May 5th the official anniversary of the Battle of Puebla, which we now know as Cinco de Mayo. Fast forward to the 1980s, something really interesting started happening. Beer companies started capitalizing on Cinco de Mayo. They started marketing their beer based around the holiday. And with that, it blew up. Americans started celebrating Cinco de Mayo everywhere, what we now know as Cinco de Mayo. It's a completely different and commercialized version of what Cinco de Mayo is. I'm sure if you went to any bar celebrating Cinco de Mayo, I think most people in there are not going to know why Cinco de Mayo is celebrated or that there was even a battle that happened in 1862. George W. Bush was the first president to celebrate Cinco de Mayo at the White House.
Cinco de Mayo is a day for special pride and remembrance for people on dos lados de la frontera. It's a reminder of the proud heritage of many Americans.
Nowadays, it seems like people assume that Cinco de Mayo is the Mexican Independence Day, which is completely wrong. That's in September. The US made it into a consumerist holiday. People don't even know why they are celebrating it. And if you haven't followed me already, you should totally follow me, okay? Oh, I'm also a day late, but I was on a plane yesterday, so that's my excuse. Bye. Cinco de Mayo matters. No, it's not just tacos and margaritas. Here's the history of Cinco de Mayo. No, I'm not Mexican. I'm from Nicaragua, which I'm going to do a whole series on Nicaragua. I refuse to take off these pimple patches. They're the only ones I have, okay? So don't judge me. Cinco de Mayo celebrates Mexico's victory over the French Empire in the Battle of Puebla. This all went down in 1862, a long time ago. Everything started when Mexico had a huge debt with the Spanish, the French, and the English. Mexico could not afford it, so they had to declare a temporary moratorium, which means we're not gonna pay you guys for like 2 years. And then the French, the Spanish, and the English were like, no, we're coming over there. They sent all their troops over to Mexico. Damn, gosh, that's really pigmented. So the French had an ulterior motive because they wanted to establish a French empire in Mexico. France was under the rule of Napoleon III, which, by the way, he was the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. And coincidentally, Napoleon Bonaparte died May 5th, 1821. And then his nephew went on to try to establish a French empire in Mexico. I mean, what is happening? This is when Spain and the English withdrew, so the French were left by themselves. But of course they stayed because they had that ulterior motive. So the French march over to Puebla, and they're fully expecting to win. But what the French didn't know was that the Mexicans had way more troops than they thought. I'll tell you the number by the end of this video. You're gonna be shook. For 3 days, the Mexicans managed to keep the French back. This meant that they were able to kill the French as they came towards them in the battle. The Mexicans ended up killing about 500 French soldiers, whereas only less than 100 Mexican soldiers died that day. This was such an important battle that they won because the French had not been defeated for over 50 years. That day, the French had 8,000 soldiers. Let's guess how many the Mexicans had. A little less than 4,000 men. So winning the battle was a huge deal. Then President Juarez declared May 5th the official anniversary of the Battle of Puebla, which we now know as Cinco de Mayo. Fast forward to the 1980s, something really interesting started happening. Beer companies started capitalizing on Cinco de Mayo. They started marketing their beer based around the holiday. And with that, it blew up. Americans started celebrating Cinco de Mayo everywhere, what we now know as Cinco de Mayo. It's a completely different and commercialized version of what Cinco de Mayo is. I'm sure if you went to any bar celebrating Cinco de Mayo, I think most people in there are not going to know why Cinco de Mayo is celebrated or that there was even a battle that happened in 1862. George W. Bush was the first president to celebrate Cinco de Mayo at the White House.
Cinco de Mayo is a day for special pride and remembrance for people on dos lados de la frontera. It's a reminder of the proud heritage of many Americans.
Nowadays, it seems like people assume that Cinco de Mayo is the Mexican Independence Day, which is completely wrong. That's in September. The US made it into a consumerist holiday. People don't even know why they are celebrating it. And if you haven't followed me already, you should totally follow me, okay? Oh, I'm also a day late, but I was on a plane yesterday, so that's my excuse. Bye!
Storytime on when I caught my stepdad abusing my mom. So a little background information, men are trash, and I was 13 and in 7th grade. Well, it was my birthday and my mom took me to the shoe store to get some new shoes, and I saw this guy keep staring at my mother. So I pulled my mom aside and whispered to her like, hey, there's some dude staring at us. Because low-key, he looked creepy as hell. Well, apparently he wasn't creepy. He came up to my mom and started talking to her, and he was flirting with my mom a lot, so I grabbed a random pair of shoes and told her I was ready to go. Her and I walk up to the register. I think the conversation is over with her and James. But then he's like, oh, like, let me pay for that. Next thing you know, they exchange numbers and I start seeing him a lot more. And my mom seemed very happy, like she was smiling 24/7. So fast forward, we all move in together and I got a job. Well, my best friend Kayla was 17 and she had her driver's license. Like for part 2. Part 2 about when I caught my stepdad abusing my mother. So like I said, we all moved in together. My mother was super happy and I had a job. My best friend would come and pick me up after this job and I would usually get off work around 7 p.m. Well, around this time, James would have already been at work. He usually started work at like 6 o'clock, but every time that I would come home, my mother would be crying in her bedroom. So I ended up telling my best friend about it, and she said that she would come and get me early the next day from work so that way we could possibly see what was happening while I wasn't there. So fast forward the next day, Kayla come and gets me early from work. She pulls around the corner and we walk to my house because they would have seen her car if we parked on the street. I quietly unlock the door. My best friend and I go upstairs. We hear my mom screaming in pain, and the bedroom door was wide open. He was hitting my mother. So I kind of whispered to my best friend to take a video while I called the cops. He ended up going to jail, got a restraining order, and now my mom and I are living in a new house. Story time about the girl who faked assault for attention. So a little background information, I was 15 and it was my sophomore year of high school. So we're gonna call this girl Carly. Well, every week this girl would come in with some sort of bruise or cut on her. Me being a decent human being, I would ask her what happened. Well, every week she would either say that somebody beat her up or she was SA'd by this one guy who took a video of them while they were doing the nasty. But you could completely tell that it was not against her will. Well, everybody would believe her because always believe the victim. Well, the same thing happened again with a different boy. Everybody saw the video, and I'm talking like people from different schools. So it got into a routine of her telling us how she would have to get abortions every month. So fast forward, I head to my first class of the day, which was English. Well, I look over at her because she sits right next to me, and I see a huge bruise on her neck. Like it looked like somebody had been choking her. Now, her and I weren't in the same friend group, but we were kind of friends. So I lean over and ask her what happened. Like for part 2.
Story time about how my neighbor is stealing my packages, stalking me, but denies everything. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I moved into a really nice apartment 3 weeks ago. It's a 1-bedroom apartment and the building has a bunch of amenities. There's even a doorman in the lobby. I felt super safe when I moved in, but 2 days after I moved in, weird things started happening. I'm lucky enough to make content for a living, which means I get sent a lot of packages to my apartment. On the second day that I moved in, my friends were over and helping me unpack everything. Suddenly, we noticed that my front door was open and 2 of my packages were missing. I locked the door and could have sworn that I had left the packages right there. I looked for them everywhere and couldn't find them. Later that night, after my friends went home, someone rang on my doorbell, but when I opened the door, no one was there. It happened a second and third time. Finally, I went online and ordered the Ring doorbell. I finally installed it, and you wouldn't imagine the things I caught on camera. 2 in the morning the following day, I see a strange man ring my doorbell and run away. This guy was in his early 30s, wearing a black hoodie, black pants, and he had a tattoo on his pinky finger. Couldn't really see his face though. When I saw the footage the next morning, I was really scared. I took it downstairs and I showed the guy at the lobby. He told me that it was probably someone who got into the apartment and not to worry about it. I mean, they always tell you not to worry about these things, but this is the kind of stuff that you do need to worry about. A few days later, I was expecting a package. I decided to go run some errands while I waited for the package to arrive. Finally got the text message saying that it was delivered to my front door. But when I show up to my front door, the package is not there. I go straight to my Ring camera and I see that the same guy had taken the package. I was furious. I went downstairs and showed the video to the guy in the lobby, and he told me to contact management. Called them, but they didn't answer, so I left an email. Sent them the 2 videos I had, but they took a week to reply back. Meanwhile, this guy continues to come to my apartment, ring the doorbell and leave, and steals most of my deliveries. Luckily, during Christmas, I flew home to be with my parents. I knew I wouldn't be receiving any deliveries, but I still kept watch of my Ring doorbell. At 1 a.m., I got a notification from my Ring doorbell that someone was there. It was the same guy, in the same exact outfit. He pressed his ear up against my door, trying to hear what I was doing. Woke up my parents, showed them the footage, and they were horrified. My dad called the building management, and he finally got through to them. He asked to get footage from the cameras in my hallways, but they told him that the cameras didn't work. Then my dad insisted that they find the guy who was doing this. Management said that they didn't recognize the man in the video. Part 2 is up. 2 of how my neighbor is stalking me and stealing all my packages but denies it. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. After I caught this guy on my Ring doorbell several times, I sent it to my building management, but they said they didn't recognize him. They told me that he probably didn't live in the building. My parents insisted that they change all the locks on the doors. They said it would be a huge inconvenience for them because it meant a lot of money, that they would have to issue new keys to every tenant in the apartment. That's when my dad told them that he would involve his lawyer, aka my uncle. The building management basically ghosted me and my parents, and eventually I had to go back to my apartment after the holidays. Told my parents I would be fine and that the guy would probably never come back. Boy, was I wrong. 2 days after I arrived back to my apartment, everything looked totally normal. My apartment building had a really nice gym, and that's where I would go work out. While I was on the treadmill, I see someone outside of the gym door, and when I saw who was standing there, I recognized him as the person in the videos. He was wearing a black hoodie and black pants. He wasn't looking straight into the gym, but he was hovering by the door. I literally jumped off the treadmill like a cat. Went straight to the door, but when he saw me, he started running away. I was ready to attack this guy. When I finally opened the door, he was gone. But this really made me angry. It meant that I was being watched at the gym and at my own apartment. It didn't feel safe. I was paying $2,500 a month for my one bedroom, but it didn't feel like a home. I decided not to tell my parents because I knew this would totally freak them out. Went back upstairs to my apartment and got ready for bed. At 11 p.m. I got another notification from my Ring doorbell. This time I could see him pressing his ear up against my door again, but this time I could see part of his face. He had a nose ring and a neck tattoo. I took a screenshot and sent it to my building management. That's when they told me that it could possibly be the person that lived in the second floor. But that they couldn't be sure and they couldn't really just show up to someone's apartment and accuse them of something like this. Because I'm so stubborn, I told them that I would handle it myself. The next morning I got dressed and went straight to the second floor. I knocked on every single door on the second floor, and they were pretty much all women. Finally, this guy opens the door and he has a nose ring. I asked him if he'd been by my apartment, but he denied it. He basically acted like he had never seen my face before. He acted so well that I started doubting it was him, even though I could see he had a nose ring. He had a purple hoodie on which covered his neck, so I couldn't tell if he had a tattoo. I apologized and went back upstairs. I decided to go to the gym once again, but as I'm working out again, I see the guy in the black hoodie outside the door. Part 3 is up. Of how my neighbor is stalking me, stealing my deliveries, but denies everything. Disclaimers are not my story time. It's me on Instagram. While I was working out at the gym, again I see the same guy in the black hoodie. But this time I wasn't gonna let him get away. I ran to the door and when I opened it, he was halfway gone. That's when I decided to chase him. Instead of running out of the building, he ran up the stairs. I knew exactly where he was going. But here's the problem. He was much faster than me. When I got up to the second floor, he had basically disappeared. I knew that this guy lived on the second floor. I went straight to his door and knocked. Of course, he didn't open. I stood there for a few seconds contemplating what I should do. Suddenly, a few doors down, a door opens. Out comes this really beautiful girl. She starts asking me if I was okay. That's when I broke down. I started to cry and I told her everything. She invited me into her apartment and she gave me a glass of water. Then she confirmed my worst fears. She told me she'd been having problems with one of her neighbors, that most of the girls on her floor were complaining about the same thing. Apparently, I wasn't the first person complaining to management about this one person. She showed me all the emails that she had sent management about this guy. Apparently, he would knock on her door and run away. She told me that some of her packages were also missing and that he would try to find her in the elevators. Then we both walked over to another girl's apartment. This girl proceeded to tell me the exact same things. That he had been stealing her packages, showing up at her door, and watching her. I felt so much better knowing that I wasn't the only one this was happening to, but we knew that we needed to do something. We all showed up at the management's office with all our complaints. But management says that there's no actual proof that this is the guy. They flat out denied to do anything about it. So now all the women in the building are watching out for each other. I want to confront this guy, but I'm not sure what to say. Pretty sure he's reselling all the packages that he steals too. What should we do?
Story time. I was the toxic best friend. So a little background information. I was 16 and a sophomore in high school. And at the beginning of the year, I met this girl who we're going to call Riley. Riley and I hit it off straight away. Like a week after knowing each other, she knew everything about me and I knew everything about her. Well, then she tells me about this guy that she's talking to, who we're going to call Jay. She said that they would hook up sometimes and he would text her sometimes. But she said that I couldn't tell anybody because he said that it had to be a secret. So I tried telling her that he sounded like a fuckboy, but she decided she was going to do whatever she wanted. And I was like, okay. So fast forward to the end of the year, he adds me on Snapchat. Okay, don't get me wrong. He was really hot, but I had my own thing going on. So I really didn't pay that much attention to him. And I thought he maybe added me on Snapchat to be like, oh my God, I really like your best friend. And then I also was caught between a rock and a hard place. Do I tell my best friend that the guy that she likes just added me on Snapchat? Or do I lie to her? Well, I was going to tell her until I got a Snapchat from him, like for part 2. Part 2 about how I was the toxic best friend. So like I said, I didn't know whether I should tell her that he added me on Snapchat or if I should. And I was going to until I got a Snapchat from him saying, hey, you're really pretty. I think we should talk sometime. So I ended up telling her about it because I felt really bad. And she was like, this is why I can't trust girls. Like, you need to unadd him right now. Like, fucking block him. And I'm like, I didn't even do anything. Like, what the fuck? So whatever. I end up blocking him. It's fine. Until he texts me one day. And he's like, hey, it's Jay. I think you blocked me on Snapchat, LOL. And him and I had talked a little bit in school and I kind of started to like him. Well, fast forward, him and I ended up hooking up a few times. We were talking a lot. And he hadn't been texting Riley as much. Well, the one night while I was sleeping over at her house, my phone was going off a lot. And I didn't think to delete any of the messages, like for part 3.
Story time about how my boyfriend is abusive to his parents. What should I do? Disclaimer is not my story time. It's on Instagram. My boyfriend and I have been dating for 11 months. Here's a little backstory. We both work at the same company and live very far from our parents. I try to go home once a month since my parents are only 2 hours away from me. His parents live in a different country. For that reason, I haven't met his parents. But he's met my parents and he's been completely respectful and really nice to them. So I never suspected that he could be abusive to his parents. So here's what happened. We flew over to his parents and they are very rich. His mom is an interior designer and their house is phenomenal. dysfunctional. His dad owns a couple of businesses, and together they are very wealthy. His parents went to pick us up at the airport, and everything was fine until we got to their house. They decided to give me a tour of their ginormous mansion. That's when I noticed that my boyfriend was being kind of rude to them. Every time they would ask me a question, he would answer and be like, duh, she likes pizza. He even asked his mom to stop asking stupid questions. I stopped him in his tracks, and in front of his parents I said, why are you being rude to your parents? The look on his parents' face was of shock, and that's when I realized that they had never disciplined him. Then it got worse. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my boyfriend is abusive to his parents. Disclaimer is now my story time listed on my Instagram. The look on his parents' face when I called him out for being rude to them was complete shock. After they gave me the tour of the house, we decided to sit down for dinner. They are so rich that they have their own chef. That's when the chef comes out and starts serving all the food. And as soon as my boyfriend sees what they served, he grabs his glass of water and bangs it against the table. He looks at both of his parents and says, what the fuck is wrong with you both? The color from their faces drain. That's when they said, I'm sorry, we didn't know he was gonna make this. The chef decided to make a really fancy meatloaf. Apparently he hates meatloaf. Then he said, well, tell him to make something else. His mother gets up and runs to the kitchen and asks the chef to make him a burger, because that's his favorite food. Which, by the way, I never even knew that. He always told me his favorite food was Indian. His mom comes back from the kitchen. Then he looks at me and says, you don't have to eat that shit if you don't want to. I told him that he was being a brat and that I'd be happy to eat the meatloaf. His parents look at me and smile. My boyfriend just gets up from the table and runs away. Can you believe I had to chase after him? Part 3 is up. Story time about how my boyfriend is abusive to his parents. What should I do? Disclaimer is not my story time. It's on Instagram. That's when my stupid boyfriend runs away from the dinner table. So of course I have to chase him. And of course I'm angry at this point. I ask him why he's being so rude to his parents. Then he literally denies that he just did anything. His words were, you're reading too much into it. My parents are stupid anyway. I looked at him and I said, do you not see the mansion we're standing in? How did 2 stupid people manage to build this mansion, 4 businesses, and put you through school? He rolls his eyes at me and says, Jesus Christ, you sound like my parents. I told him that he was a privileged rat. You see, I come from a family where we don't have chefs, and we don't have millions of dollars, or a mansion. So I appreciate everything my parents did for me. I went back to the dining room and I told his parents it was nice to meet them, but that I could no longer be with their son. That's when his mom started begging me not to leave. It was hard, but I called an Uber and I went home. My boyfriend's been begging me to get back with him. He's trying really hard too. His parents are even offering to pay my student loans. I'm honestly confused now. What should I do?
Story time about why I will never let my sister pet sit for me ever again. So a little background information. I was 18 and it was the summer before my freshman year in college. And it was towards the end of the summer, so I decided that I wanted to take a vacation with a few of my girlfriends before we all went off to the different colleges that we were going to. And I have a lot of pets. I have 4 hamsters, 2 snakes, a tarantula, 2 birds, and 1 fish. So I asked her if she could watch all of them. She said yeah, so I wrote her out a schedule of when they need to be fed. And I wasn't even going to be gone a week, so it would be pretty easy because I already cleaned all their tanks and everything like that. And I wasn't worried at all because I trusted my sister. She had 2 dogs and a cat, so I thought she was going to be fine. I called her the first 2 days. Everything seemed to be going well. And I called her on the 4th day and she didn't answer the phone. So I called my mom, asked her if she could get a hold of her. And my mom said that she spent the 2 days at her boyfriend's house, like for part 2. Part 2 about why I will never let my sister pet sit for me ever again. So like I said, I called my mom asking if she could get a hold of her, and she said that she spent the last 2 days at her boyfriend's house. And the worst part was, my sister was the only one with a key to my apartment. So my sister calls me the next day and she's like, hey, sorry, like I was at my boyfriend's house. And I was like, who fed the animals? And she was like, well, I just put enough in their cages so that way they would be fine for like 3 days. And she was like, don't worry, I'll sleep over there tonight to make sure they're okay. So I'm like having a fucking panic attack right now. Anyways, so fast forward, I get home early in the morning and my sister's sleeping on the couch, but my sister brought over her animals too. So I wake my sister up and I'm like, hey, like, how are all the animals? She's like, oh, they're fine. And then we walk into the kitchen and the fucking bird cage is open and my birds are missing and her cats are nowhere to be found. So now I'm freaking the fuck out. So then I go to check on the rest of my animals, like for part 3. Part 3 about why I will never let my sister pet sit for me ever again. So like I said, we walk into the kitchen and the bird cage is open and my birds are nowhere to be found and neither is her cat. So at that point, I run to check on all of my other animals. Thankfully, the snakes were fine, so I go to check on my tarantula and he's missing. So now I grabbed my sister's dogs, locked them in my room, and I went to go check on my hamsters. Yeah, she forgot to feed them the whole week because one of them ate the other one. So at this point, I'm having like a mental fucking breakdown and I'm moving all the furniture in the living room and everything like that. and we lift up the couch and we see her cat bolt out from under the couch. After that, I look under the couch and my bird is literally torn into pieces under the fucking couch. A few days later, she texted me and she was like, hey, like, I feel so bad. Like, let me buy you a new bird and a new tarantula. And to this day, 2 years later, I still don't know what happened.
Story time about how I found out my husband was hooking up with men off of Craigslist. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's not me on Instagram. My husband and I have been married for 5 years. This man is the most prudish person I have ever met in my entire life. He never curses. He does not drink. Basically, he's never done anything naughty in his life. When we met, he was the perfect candidate for me. My parents are very religious and very strict. When they saw the way my husband was, basically super uptight, never wanting to do anything fun, they insisted that I marry him. So basically, this is all my parents' fault. To be honest with you guys, I never really was super attracted to him, but I knew that he would be a good provider. He's pretty high up in the company he works for, and he makes north of $300,000 per year. But I do own 2 of my own businesses, so it's not like I need him to survive. But my parents insisted on me marrying somebody who was already well off. And of course, one of my dreams is to become a mother, so I need a man who's going to be able to provide for me and my kids, especially when I'm pregnant. So we ended up getting married. Was there passion and chemistry? Not so much. But we did have a good time, and he would make me laugh. We essentially became really good friends. Up until I found some stuff on his laptop. Part 2 of how I found out my husband was hooking up with men off of Craigslist. Disclaimer, is not my story time. It's me on Instagram. One day while I was working from home, I needed to get on his laptop to check our cameras. I just gotten a new set of security cameras for our house. I needed to make sure that they were all working. I opened his laptop, typed in the password, and it was wrong. I'd always had the same password for the past 5 years. I didn't bother texting him. Instead, I tried to guess. And because I know this man so well, I guessed it in the first try. But as soon as I log in, there's about 5 Craigslist windows open, all with similar titles. Male looking for male. Male interested in male company. This literally shook me to my core. You're telling me that I'm married to a gay man and that he's hooking up with men off of Craigslist? That's when I went ahead and checked his email, only to find that he had been sending pictures and other things to these men. Not only that, but he had met with 2 of them. I instantly printed out all the evidence. Like I said in part 1, I'm not particularly attracted to my husband. I never have been. I really only married him because my parents pressured me into it. Here's what I did. Instead of just asking for a divorce, I wanted to humiliate him. I needed to make him pay. After printing everything out, I sent it to his job. And I sent it to his parents and my parents. Part 3 is up. That's when I sent videos of my own husband hooking up with other men to his job, my parents, and his parents. At this point, I had been married to a man that I wasn't attracted to for 5 years, only to find out that he was hooking up with other men off of Craigslist. Remember I said in part 1 how prudish my husband was? He always made himself seem like he was the perfect man, like he had never done anything bad in his life. But let me tell you, some of the things I read in those emails, and the pictures, and the video, disgusting. No wonder he put off having kids for so long, and no wonder he made me get on the pill, because he never had the intention of having kids. When everyone received their packages, my husband called me super upset. He said that he had only done it for about a week, and that it was just him experimenting. And he told me that his job put him on suspension. My parents, of course, stopped speaking to him. My mother-in-law calls me on the phone and tells me that she had always known that he was gay. And apparently they insisted on him not marrying me. But he was set on having the perfect wife. The perfect life. We're obviously getting a divorce now, and I'm getting all his money. Or at least I'm gonna try. He's already claiming that I'm obsessed with him, so he wants to get a restraining order. I need to make him suffer even more. How should I do this? Part 4 will be up soon.
Story time about how my husband accidentally told me that he was cheating on me. So just some background information. My husband and I got engaged 2 years ago, and this whole situation happened a month after we got married. So fast forward, it's a Sunday morning. Well, usually every week on Sunday, I clean the whole house. So I woke up, went into the bathroom to take my ring off, and I could not get it off. Mind you, I had gained a little bit of weight since my husband and I got engaged. Anyways, I tried butter, I tried soap, I tried everything, even oil. So after trying to get it off for an hour straight, my finger was 3 times bigger than it usually is. So at this point, I'm really scared that I'm going to have to get it cut off. Because 1, I didn't want to ruin it, and 2, it was really expensive. So I call my husband and he's like, oh, call your dad. Firefighters always know what to do. So I called my dad and thank God he lived 5 minutes away because he drove over really quickly. Like for part 2. Part 2 of how my husband accidentally told me that he was cheating on me. So like I said, my dad lived 5 minutes away, so he just rushed over to my house. And we tried a few more things to get it off. We tried Windex, we tried the dental floss, none of it was working. So my dad told me that we were going to have to cut it off with pliers. So he comes over with the pliers, cuts the ring off. Well, a few days later, I had taken it to the same place that we got it to get the band fixed. Or replaced. While I was there, I decided to get it appraised, just for insurance reasons. So a few days later, I go and pick up my ring, and when I get home, I look at the appraisal. It was not the same one that I had picked out in the store. It looked exactly like it, but there was like a $20,000 price difference. So right now, I'm like, what the fuck? I'm not mad about the money part. I'm more mad that my husband lied to me. I was more upset about the fact that he had lied to me. So I had made dinner reservations for the next night so that way I could hopefully bring up the conversation about it, like for part 3. Part 3 of how my husband accidentally told me that he was cheating on me. So like I said, I had made reservations for him and I to go out to dinner so that way I could hopefully spark up the conversation about it. So when we finally sat down, I had started up the conversation. I had told him that when I took my ring in to get it fixed, I also got it appraised. And his face immediately changed after that, but he wasn't saying anything. He was like, oh, okay, how did that go? So at this point, I was tired of beating around the bush, and I was like, why wouldn't you just tell me if we were having money troubles? And he was like, what do you mean? We're not having any money troubles. I'm fine. One thing about my husband is that he is very wealthy. And he takes pride in the fact that he is very wealthy. So obviously, me right there kind of questioning his wealth, he fucked up and told me the truth. He was like, well, I'm going to be honest with you. I accidentally gave the ring that I was supposed to give you to a girl I was seeing at the time. And I just never got around to replacing yours. So fast forward to present day, I am currently moving all of my stuff out of our house and filing for divorce.